Hey everyone, this is Chad,
This is Serena.
and welcome to Edu Life.
Episode 5.
Are you worried about suspicions of drug dealing or theft in schools, or even the whole multicultural context within the classroom? Well, don't you worry. We're talking to Dr. Gus Riveros and Dr. George Sousa about these wonderful topics, so stay tuned.
Join me this week as I talk to Patrick Tomzik, a PhD student researching arts-based intervention and prevention in bullying.
So welcome to episode 5 of Edu Life, and today we have Dr. Gus Riveros. He is a Faculty of Education Ed Policy Studies instructor. You may have seen him teaching Ed Policy Studies 410, so we're very lucky to have him today, and today we have him to talk about specifically suspicions of drug dealing or theft in the classroom, so more about law and ethics in the classroom. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And our first question to you is, if we are suspicious of drug dealing with students in the classroom, how should we deal with that? Should we be able to contact the police? What should our steps be in terms of that?
Well, school boards have designed a number of guidelines as of how to deal with these issues. So the first thing that I would suggest is to make sure that you know and understand what are the guidelines from your school board. Second, those guidelines are based on a number of court cases, a number of landmark cases by the Supreme Court of Canada. So there are a number of cases that sort of provide the guidelines as of how to conduct the search in school grounds.
Where can we find those guidelines?
We can find those guidelines in the proceedings of the Supreme Court of Canada. There are many sources online, and the library, Courts Library, has a number of sources also that we can find those court cases. I'm talking in particular of two main landmark cases, the RVMA and RVMMR. Those are the two, we could say, landmark cases that sort of provide the guidelines as of how to conduct the search in school grounds.
So how do we conduct the search, Dr. Gus Riveros?
The first thing that you need to keep in mind is that the Section 8 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms protect us from unreasonable searches. So they say that everyone is secure from unreasonable searches. Now, in school grounds, while in the school property or under the supervision of a school authority, students have a lower expectation of privacy. That means that, and this is a guideline provided by the Supreme Court, that means that school authorities have the right to search students when they are suspicious of some sort of violation. The standard for those searches is called the reasonable suspicion standard, which is a lower standard from the standard that a police officer could use.
So what is the standard for police officers if they're doing a search?
Generally, a police officer may require a warrant or may require what we call a probable cause, right? Which is a higher standard that requires that is more reasonable than not to that some sort of activity, illegal activity is going on.
Right, so could you talk a little bit about our position as teachers and talk a little bit about the in loco parentis doctrine?
Yes, the in loco parentis doctrine has been one of those standards that have been used as to provide a justification for the action of teachers in the classroom. Now, I have to say that the in loco parentis is no longer considered, is not used anymore as a standard, because the in loco parentis doctrine come from a tradition that used to portray the children as property of their parents. But now, after some legal developments, for example, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Children, we tend to see children as having individual rights. Right. Therefore, the standard that we use nowadays is not the in loco parentis, we use the idea of fiduciary obligation in terms of teachers having a duty of care toward the student, and the doctrine of parens patriae. That means that teachers should protect, look after the rights of the student, and not take the position of the parent who owns the child and can decide for the child.
So going back to that, the suspicions of drug dealing, so as through that doctrine, how do we know if we are completely, absolutely suspicious? What sources do we need?
Well, so the Supreme Court have offered two main guidelines. A search to be conducted in school grounds by a school authority must be based on reasonable inception. The search must be reasonable in inception, and the search must be reasonable in scope. That means that when the school authority has reliable information from credible sources, such as other teachers, other students, observation, and a combination of those, they have reasonable grounds to conduct the search.
That is pretty cool.
But also, that search must be reasonable in scope. That means that when you are conducting a search, the search must be related to the violation. The search must respect the dignity of the person.
Could you give us an example of where it is respectful of the dignity of the student?
We have a case, actually, a very interesting case that happened a few years ago in Ontario. It was the strip search case. So we had a case in which a amount of money was missing, and then an administrator and the teacher conducted a search that required the students to take off their clothes. Wow. After the case was reviewed by the courts, they found that that search was unreasonable in scope. That means that they went too far as of how to conduct the search and did not preserve the dignity, was too invasive, was too intrusive. Even though by law they were allowed to search the students, the manner in which that search was conducted was unreasonable, right? So and therefore the teacher and the administrator were disciplined for this issue. And this is I want to add that there is a very important thing that student teachers, pre-service teachers must be aware of. One of the arguments from the teacher that conducted that search was that he was following the orders of his superior, and therefore he should not be disciplined for following the orders of his superior.
Oh, that's a very good point.
However, the court determined that he was acting within his fiduciary obligations. And the fiduciary obligation means that you have to always look after the rights of the student. And in that case, he just exercised poor judgment, right? Then by conducting that search that was so intrusive, he did not, even though he was following the orders, he did not respect, he did not protect the rights of his students, and therefore there were grounds for disciplining this teacher.
Wow, that blows my mind. Everything that you've said and everything that's come out of your mouth, I feel like I've just had a review of EDPS 410 Law and Ethics. So if you haven't taken that course, definitely check it out. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So much. Yeah.
Hi everyone, this week I have the pleasure of talking to Patrick Tomzik, a sessional instructor and PhD student in secondary education. Before we start, Patrick, could you quickly tell everyone what your research is on?
Sure. So I'm studying bullying in the classroom, and I'm looking at how drama and theater can be used as a tool for conflict transformation and for peace building.
Okay, so specifically to drama, what sort of opportunities do you have in conflict resolution and in bullying that you don't in other places or with other techniques?
Great question. So over the last 25 years, there's been a lot of packaged interventions, anti-bullying campaigns, but the research shows that nothing's worked. The unique thing about drama is that it's embodied, so the students can get in there and act it out through role play, through projection. They can build communication, empathy, and they could really understand the problems because they get to act it out in a safe context.
So you mentioned role play and projection. Could you quickly expand on what those ideas are for everyone?
Sure. So the idea is that we bring in stakeholders from the community, so teachers, students, principals, parents, anyone that has something to say about bullying. We kind of take all these stories, and then we used forum theater, which comes out of critical theory from Augusto Boal's work. And the students embody different characters, and they play out the different scenarios, and then we could learn about what happens in the situation and what could happen in the situation to resolve it.
Okay, so it's looking at different paths that could be taken to come to hopefully a bit better of a solution than what took place.
Yeah, that's the primary idea behind it. And students are more apt to engage in participatory action in a drama activity, and they're more open-minded and receptive to the ideas, as opposed to having someone saying, bullying is bad, don't be a bully, because it's more engaging, right?
And is the idea of having the community involved, is that very important to you?
It's very important to me, but it's also proven that if everyone's involved, the outcome will be so much better.
And I guess you've had experience in high school?
Yeah, so teaching in junior high and high school.
Okay. Were you able to test any of these techniques in your time teaching?
I have. I've used drama a lot to build empathy and communication skills. Primarily what I'm looking at is research that came out of Australia, where they've used similar methods over an 8-year period across the country. And it's been very successful, so I'm hoping to take some of their research and adapt it here in Alberta and maybe in a larger context in Canada.
What type of issues have taken place in Australia that you see are adaptable here?
Well, there's lots of issues around race discrimination, gender discrimination. So those are two particular hot topics. Cyberbullying is really, really big in both countries as well. And we know that bullying happens almost every 7 minutes on the playground and up to every 25 minutes in a classroom. And previously, when kids would go home, they'd be safe. But now because of cyberbullying, some of the bullying that happens is most pervasive at night, and the kids, on Facebook, Twitter, and everything, they continue to be bullied. So I'm looking also at addressing that issue.
Wow, that's a big topic. Do you have any ideas for, I guess, starting teachers, new teachers, on how they can begin to approach those ideas?
Well, if you think about it, if a kid's calling out for help because they're identifying as being bullied, it's at a point where there's a lot of psychological and physical torment that child is going through. So it needs to be addressed there and then. It's not a question of you need to stand up for yourself anymore. It's not a question of you need to discipline the bully. Everybody needs to be brought into the situation, including the stakeholders, the teachers, the principals, and the parents who are bystanders, because sometimes they're the ones that see the bullying happen, but they dismiss it as this is a one-off situation, or it's teasing, or it's not bullying.
So once again, we're coming back to the idea of bringing all these community members in to help come to a solution.
That's it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Patrick.
And welcome back to Edu Life. This is episode 5. My name is Serena Lee, and I am recording to you at the Faculty of Education. Today we are joined by Dr. George Sousa. He is an associate professor at the U of A of Ed Policy Studies, and he's also the coordinator for the specialization program for adult education in graduate studies. So, Dr. Sousa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. So our topic today is actually on diversity and multiculturalism in the classroom. So Dr. George Sousa is going to give us a little bit of pointers on that topic. So first things first, as pre-service teachers, how should we acknowledge multiculturalism and diversity within the classroom?
Well, I think the first place to start is to be prepared that there will be a lot of difference, and there will be people from different backgrounds and different cultures, different languages, and you can't just assume there's only one kind of student that's going to be in your class. So it can be either understanding their cultural practices, But I think it starts with reflecting on how your practice ends up just being more, I guess, promoting a certain dominant way of looking at education and learning, as opposed to where you think the student can best learn and how to account for their cultural, I guess, understanding.
And knowing the demographics of Canada and the exponential increase of immigrants in Canada nowadays, how do you think that actually changes the demographics of the classroom?
Well, first, I think the implication by asking that question is that it's a problem. And I don't think it's a problem. If anything, it actually builds a strength, more strength into the classroom, because it gives somebody a chance to start thinking about their teaching, thinking about their practice in different ways, rather than thinking there's only one or two ways to teach. And I think by forcing yourself to think about your students and where they're coming from will do nothing but improve your practice. And also having people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different strengths in your classroom, there'll certainly be a lot more opportunities for students to learn more than just the manifest content that you get in your class. It's much more the length of the understanding of relationships and different groups that that live in your community and not just in your class. It builds a healthier environment rather than seeing it as a problem that has to be overcome.
And could you give us a little bit maybe background experience in your own education maybe about this topic?
Well, I've never taught in the K-12 system, but I certainly have worked in settings where there has been a lot of diversity, and I think the biggest learning for me was really how conditioned I was to look at people from certain backgrounds in similar ways, that I saw really not understanding English as a weakness rather than something that I should be working with people to address, and also how I can deal with within my own practice, to support those students to learn. Learning in English is just one way. You can learn in different languages. Sorry, now that you got me going. No, I just remember a student that asked me about, because she was having a lot of trouble writing in English, and she was a student from the Ukraine. And she really felt that English not being her first language was a disability or a challenge or an obstacle. And I just reminded her there are different ways and different strategies that you can show what you know and what you learn. And it's also important to me to recognize that you're not going to be at the same place, so you need to represent and communicate your ideas in ways that best suit you, and not necessarily is going to be the same. So it's more work for the instructor, and that's the other part, that teachers have to be prepared that it is more work by taking into account a lot of differences, but it is rewarding work.
I love the positive outlook that you have on this, and just leading into that, I want to talk a little bit about the dangers of assumptions. So if there's a child from Pakistan, is it safe to assume that they know a lot about the Canadian culture? How should we tackle that situation?
Well, I think just the assumption that there is such a thing as a Canadian culture is part of the problem. And I think you have to think about what is the fundamentals that you would hope a student can know that will support their educational achievement. Is it knowing about culture or whatever the Canadian culture is? Well, if that supports people, then I think it's safe to say that you should be working to help those people. But I can tell you, if you're from Pakistan, India, China, Portugal, which is where I'm from, you can't assume that that people know what it is to be a Canadian. That's imposed on people, and I think the strength of living in Canada is that we are able to be who it is that we want to be in a way that we understand the world from our own background and that reflects our culture, and we can be ourselves. It's when people choose to force us to be something else based on what they think that we should be, that's where the problems actually start to appear.
And another question, where can we find resources in terms of, because I'm a pre-service teacher, so I want to know more about this topic. Where should I go? Where should I start?
Well, you can take EDPS 360 as you did. I would certainly encourage you to, any student certainly.
What is that course about? EDPS 360, now that we're on the topic of it.
Sure, Society and Education, which you did brilliantly, I must say. It is a course where we look at, certainly not just multiculturalism, but we start to unpack and look at the problems as well as the strengths of how society shapes our educational system and how our educational system is a reflection of society. So it's what we would call the reciprocal relationship. And it is really challenging for people to take this course because it does force people to really reflect, not to look at their navels, but to really reflect on what kind of educator and pedagogue they really want to be. And I think that's what you brought to the class. Certainly was that you were questioning and you were asking really important questions. And a lot of people end up being silent because they just think they think there's a checklist on how to deal with difference and diversity and multiculturalism in the class, and there's not. The checklist is is sort of this way of looking at what is dominant, what is right, and what is wrong, and really what is the best way to go about doing it is trusting your gut, but recognizing your biases and how we're conditioned to really be racist and how we're conditioned to build on privilege rather than challenge existing privilege.
Wow, that is amazing outlook. I am so impressed. It feels like 360 just flashing before my eyes. Thank you so much. So if you haven't taken EDPS 360, definitely take a look. It is an awesome course. Dr. George Sousa himself is teaching it. And for last but not least, did you want to talk a little bit about your graduate courses that you teach?
Well, I teach my primary areas in community development and community economic development. So in adult education, we certainly work with adults in different ways to support their knowledge and learning within community settings. And so I focus on understanding the traditions of adult education and how that supports, I guess, more disadvantaged communities to strengthen and build self-reliance among themselves rather than relying on people to impose ideas. And always to me is to focus on the assets that people bring to a situation, and that can be anybody. I don't care what class, what race, I don't care where you're coming from. Everybody has something to offer. And I'm interested in how people realize that and practice that.
That is amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Edu Life episode 6.
That was amazing.